In the world of video games, studio closures and layoffs have become all too common. And yet, even still, the closure of Bluepoint Games was weird. Like, you acquire a remake studio and then you close them before they do any remakes while they're officially owned by you. Something about this didn't make any sense to me, and I desperately wanted to know what happened behind the scenes at Bluepoint Games. A question that we usually never get the answer to. However, in this circumstance, we actually kinda did. At least it seems like it. Thanks to some reporting from Jason Schreier over on Bloomberg, as well as some independent reports that are corroborated and substantiated by the Jason Schreier report, we have a pretty comprehensive timeline of events of everything that happened between Demon's Souls releasing, Bluepoint getting acquired, and then them eventually being shut down. A few weeks back on my Twitch stream, I sat down with my chat and we went through the entire timeline of events and also discussed what went wrong, what went right, and what PlayStation should have done instead. I've taken that Twitch stream and I've cut it down to give you the most pertinent information and the most conclusive timeline of what we know about what happened to Bluepoint. So without further ado, roll the VOD edit. It looks like we finally have an answer about what was happening behind the scenes at Bluepoint from the moment they got acquired until the moment they were shut down. Now, this originally came to us from a Twitter thread by Detective Seeds, who has a hit or miss ratio when it comes to reporting on stuff. He's got a lot of things wrong in the past, so this information was not immediately seen as valid. But since then, there's been new reporting by Jason Schreier that got published on Bloomberg that pretty much corroborates a lot of the information that is in this Twitter thread. And so enough of it has been confirmed to be true where I think it's pretty safe to say that most, if not all of this is true. So I'm going to treat this as fact and go through it, take it with a bit of a grain of salt because not all of it is confirmed, but enough of it is where this is probably a pretty good idea about what happened behind the scenes at Bluepoint. Information I didn't think we were ever going to get, really. I'm actually surprised that we end up getting this information. And this does, at least for me anyway, provide closure. Like, now that I understand more about what happened behind the scenes, I can kind of accept this more. It still sucks that it happened, and I still think it was entirely preventable, but hearing about the chaos behind the scenes does make everything make a lot more sense. Bluepoint Games final report, from Bloodborne remake potential to Shuttered. I spoke to 4 Bluepoint employees, and this is their story on timeline, dates, and code names for projects. So we start with the end of 2020. Bluepoint ships Demon's Souls and talks begin with Sony acquisition and working on more original projects. Sony did not think the remakes remasters made enough money, and some people from Bluepoint and Sony wanted to branch out, which is the first thing that threw me, because I thought that, and I think everyone thought, that the reason you acquire Bluepoint Studios is because they're the remake remaster guys. And so if you have plans to do a lot more remakes and remasters, because people are pretty much begging for any of the PS3 stuff to be at least ported and a lot of it to even be remade, that you would bring on Bluepoint and have them do that. I understand that people at Bluepoint want to start working on more original content. I think you can absolutely add original content to the remakes. You can reimagine a couple elements of them, and there's some games where, like Infamous 1, that was good but had a lot of room for improvement. That'd be a perfect opportunity for someone to come in like Bluepoint and add some more side quests, rearrange some things. You can improve Infamous 1 without making people too upset because it's Infamous. It's not, people like it, but it's not like a holy grail type game that something like Shadow of the Colossus or Demon's Souls is considered, where making changes to those is a little bit more blasphemous than Infamous 1. You know what I mean? So there's definitely projects they could have worked on where they could have cut their teeth on more design experience while still doing remakes. But so the fact that the remakes and remasters didn't seem to make enough money on from Sony's perspective makes the acquisition of Bluepoint very weird to me, especially because, as we'll see, they did not really have the infrastructure to be making the jump that they tried to make. All heard that Shadow of the Colossus remake lost money. I did not know that, but it was assumed it would, which I also didn't realize. But Yoshida wanted to preserve the game, which that's really cool. Like, PlayStation used to be run by people who genuinely care about games and who come from video game backgrounds themselves. So, like, someone like Shuhei Yoshida wanting to do the Shadow of the Colossus remake because he wanted to make sure that Shadow of the Colossus was preserved, be playable by future generations, and that there was like a modern, updated version of that game that, would cement, its accessibility for a long time is awesome. They're making a choice to put the art first over profit, and I feel like many of the major problems with PlayStation now is a lot of the leadership, like Jim Ryan, was terrible for his company. in large part because Jim Ryan was just a business dude, you know what I mean? Like, he didn't care about video games in the way that, like, someone like Shuhei Yoshida did, or the other past executives that worked at PlayStation. But the Shadow of the Colossus remake, biggest criticism was the new face of the main character. However, Fumito Ueda wanted to look that way and designed it. I didn't know there was even a controversy about the way the main character looked. There were conversations about doing add-on content to the remakes to help with funding into original content and grow design department. I'm a big fan of remakes being adaptations and changing things and doing more to add on to a remake project. For Shadow of the Colossus, I definitely also get the argument that the original game was crafted around a very particular pacing, and while bosses did get cut, Fumito Ueda like really did a great job with the pacing of that game. Adding in new bosses might make it feel like too long or drawn out or might not fit correctly. And maybe it's not the best idea for a studio who doesn't have very much original design experience of their own to be messing with that too much. Like, that might be too big of a challenge for them to try out the gate. But I think a compromise this could have been like a second forgotten boss rush mode. So it's like a second mode you unlock after beating the game where they maybe take a couple of the bosses that got cut, try to finish designing those themselves, and have that be like a separate boss rush mode away from the main campaign. That way, if they fuck it up, it doesn't like ruin the remake, you know what I mean? It was assumed in the studio that Bluepoint would be remaking Bloodborne after Demon's Souls. Bluepoint had a design department of 1 to 2 people, but it was not sufficient for a full project. Yeah, dude, this is the biggest thing that's confusing to me, and that we will get into as we keep going through here, how confusing it is that the thing that was the nail in the coffin, the thing that like cooked the studio, was that they didn't staff up their design department or hire an in-house director, which is very confusing. Why they simultaneously were really pushing internally to PlayStation that they do original work, but yet didn't have the staff for it. It's very confusing. It doesn't really make any sense. Bluepoint's management is to blame, but also PlayStation did a terrible job managing the studio as well. Should have been a lot more hands-on with Bluepoint from way earlier. 2021. Quote, in early 2021, after Demon's Souls, studio staff assumed that they would work on Bloodborne. They started to prepare for it. However, they did not get the green light due to internal policies of Bloodborne involving a fragile relationship with From Software, Sony, and the original IP. Sources do not think Bloodborne remake will ever happen or ever be made due to politics. This is interesting. I don't think they have much of a fragile relationship anymore, because since 2021, PlayStation has acquired a lot of From Software. They're essentially their parent company to an extent. I'm sure that relationship has been repaired, but maybe just after the Demon's Souls remake, maybe it just didn't really come out the way FromSoft was hoping, and they just didn't want Bloodborne to be touched, is kind of like what I think is more likely. Bloodborne was pulled from the table, and Bluepoint had no project. Bluepoint was assigned to help with Ragnarok support due to Sony Santa Monica needing some help, and a combo of other factors. This is the thing that makes the most amount of sense in this entire article, or this entire timeline, because yeah, you have a studio that does really good asset work. If they don't currently have anything to do, something that would be great for them to do is just be a support studio for another studio. Like, it keeps everyone employed, it buys you some time. I don't know why they didn't go back to this method again, but this right here is the smartest thing that Bluepoint and Sony did throughout this entire process. Dude, we're going to be suffering from the Jim Ryan era for so long. Jim Ryan was pushing live service hard, and Sony had a desire to explore making the God of War franchise into an Assassin's Creed style franchise, which is a terrible idea. That is a god-awful idea. You have like this beloved, super artistic, Game of the Year award-winning franchise, and your thought is like, let's turn it into repetitive. I like the Assassin's Creed games, but come on, like, they've got a reputation of being just like repetitive filler stuff. There's too many of them. They come out too quickly. They're too big. They're too bloated. It's like that's the wrong franchise to want to try and emulate. What would compel you to want to do that? The franchise will explore different mythologies and characters. They're already doing that in the main campaign. It doesn't make any sense to like flood the market with God of War content. I mean, right now we got the side scroller, we got the sequel, and we got the remakes. Like, I think that's like max God of War that you should be putting out right now. You know what I mean? So Bluepoint was not allowed to make a game with Kratos, as Sony Santa Monica did not trust Bluepoint with that, and it would be too expensive. I mean, that is the right call right there. Like, at least someone at Sony Santa Monica was like, hold on, slow the fuck down. Like, these guys who have never designed their own game are not just gonna like start making a God of War game that's in our main continuity and potentially fuck up whatever timeline we got going. It's like we had a roadmap that didn't include these guys making a spin-off game. Like, let's slow down there. I don't know, to make like God of War like Assassin's Creed, it'll piss off a lot of people and it'll kill the God of War franchise. Exactly. And from I think like those plans died of Jim Ryan when Jim Ryan left the studio. I think it died of him. So, because I remember this is back in 2021, so a lot's changed since then. Sony Santa Monica was like, okay, pump the brakes. Like, Bluepoint's not gonna jump in and make a God of War game, but that's probably where this live service compromise came from. So, September 30th, 2021, Bluepoint is bought by Sony. Now, Bluepoint is acquired and tasked with coming up with an original project in the God of War universe. The catch is they need to stretch the content, but Bluepoint employees did not know at the time that this was a live service game. They stated a gamble was made by convincing Sony to buy us instead of us looking for funding elsewhere. After the acquisition, there was a cultural change within Bluepoint. Now, this is interesting. I did not realize this. Apparently, Bluepoint was the one who came to Sony and was like, we would like to be acquired. PlayStation was not necessarily aggressively looking to acquire Bluepoint. Bluepoint wanted to be acquired so that they wouldn't have to worry about figuring out where the funding was coming from for their next project. I mean, this was a move that kind of backfired on them because they got shut down, but it does make sense at the time. If you're like an independent studio, your biggest stress is like, okay, well, after this project, we got to negotiate another contract. There's no guarantee the lights are going to stay on. It did seem like in their position, I would also assume that just getting acquired by PlayStation is a good long-term strategy. The problem is, as we'll get into, they didn't really want to do remakes anymore, but they didn't have the talent to do any original content. And I don't mean talent as in like the people working there aren't talented. I mean just like they said earlier they only had 2 designers working at the studio. You can't make an original AAA game with 2 designers. There's only like 50 people that work at the studio. You know what I mean? Like at 50 to 70, it's like a small studio. You have a tiny design department. You don't have there's not a director. There's not an in-house director at the studio. I don't know how the hell they thought they were going to make original content. And yeah, and PlayStation's like, you've got to stretch content out. Given these parameters, the idea for them to do a live service game kind of makes sense because it's like it is less assets that you have to make, right? Instead of creating this whole big single-player game, you create like a handful of multiplayer maps and then you do the same thing over and over and over again. From an asset point of view, it kind of makes sense. But my question is just like, why were those your 2 options? Why was it AAA game that they don't have the staff for, or live service? Why didn't they just make like a smaller, like Astrobot sized game? There were so many better options for what they could do. In 2022, prototyping begins for Demon's Souls meets God of War, also called CP13. So a Souls-like God of War game is not necessarily a terrible idea. I could see how that could work out. It being live service is the strange thing about it. My question is just like, why did Bluepoint need to work on a spin-off title? Like, I just don't understand. If they want to make original content, they should make an original IP. It's unclear how much this is like Jim Ryan being like, well, we need to get more studios on God of War because we got to make God of War a bigger franchise. It's got to be it's got to be our Assassin's Creed. How much of it is Bluepoint being like, we want to work on a God of War game? And how much of it is Bluepoint being like, we've got an idea for a live service, or it's PlayStation pushing a live service? It's kind of hard to tell here. It seems like there was a disconnect between what the people working at the studio wanted and what the leadership at Bluepoint wanted for the studio. Assuming a little bit, but it kind of seems here that like the leadership at Bluepoint were kind of like more businessy people that didn't really understand the strengths and weaknesses of their team. They just had like ambitions of becoming like the next big PlayStation studio or whatever, without really realizing that on a technical level they didn't have the talent in place to make that happen at the stage they're at. Then this is where I think Sony should have come in and be like, look, that's great that you want to do that, but you guys are the remake studio until you prove that you're not. So we're going to keep giving you remakes, but we'll give you a remake that you can do a little bit of original design work to. Like, PlayStation really should have put their foot down and like been like, this is what, if you want to get acquired, this is what you're doing for us. Maybe that is what they were doing, but the problem was Jim Ryan in the position of power, who also didn't understand game design. Like, Jim Ryan was another business suit type of dude who didn't understand anything about like how actual video games are made. Like, Jim Ryan is generational damage to PlayStation. But Bluepoint staff was not initially told that the game was a live service game. Bluepoint still had a minimal design team. Bluepoint did not have a game director for this project, was promised one on loan from Sony Santa Monica, and a couple designers once Ragnarok was shipped. Which is crazy. Why would you not just staff up a director? Like, why would you not just hire a director? You can absolutely find some game director who is looking for a new gig. You know, there's never been a time in video game history where it was hard to find talent that needed work, you know? Why they would not just staff up their design department and hire an in-house director is very strange to me. Unless you're just trying to, like, save money, but like that doesn't make sense either. It's like, why would you buy the studio if you didn't have intent of funding the studio enough for them to stand on their own? Like, it's very strange that at no point during this 5-year process of them trying to figure out what to do with Bluepoint, after they bought them, did they ever consider a option where they didn't have to be attached to an existing studio. During this entire thing, they were treated very much as like an appendage, not like a standalone studio. And it's very strange that you would buy them without the intent of bolstering their capabilities. But end of 2022, Sony Santa Monica game director and designer joined the team. A lot of time was spent prototyping. The mesh of Sony Santa Monica and Bluepoint did not go well as they were not familiar with Bluepoint's engine. Fully remote work due to COVID and hiring freezes at Sony. So yeah, I don't know why the hell there was a hiring freeze. After you acquire these studios, you would expect that you would invest in them. It doesn't make any sense because this is around time where they were buying a bunch of studios because they were trying to compete in the acquisitions wars with Microsoft. But like, why would you spend the money to acquire a studio if you couldn't staff up those studios? Like, maybe acquire less and make sure that you have the finances to fully form the studios that you are buying. There are so many points of failure in this process, and now there's a lot more to get through. But after reading this, I fully understand why Bluepoint got shut down. Which, don't get me wrong, I still think was entirely preventable because everyone in this process just did the dumbest things possible. But, like, seeing how much of a mess it was behind the scenes, I'm like, oh, of course this got shut down, dude. This was a mess from the beginning. So, Sony Santa Monica, the God of War games use a proprietary engine. Fun fact, the engine that runs God of War Ragnarok is the same engine that was running God of War in 2005. They've just continued to build off it's called the God of War engine, and like it's an in-house engine. It's only used on the God of War games, and they have continued to build and iterate on it like for the entirety of the time that they've been a studio. And so like all the documentation around it is like they wrote it themselves, and apparently the engine's like kind of a mess, but everyone at Sony Santa Monica is just so comfortable with it now, they're just going to keep using it, and it works for them, you know? So like they've just been building off of it for like 20 plus years now, and it works for them. But Bluepoint, I don't know what Bluepoint was using, if it was proprietary engine or Unreal Engine 5 or whatever, but yeah, the guys at Sony Santa Monica, the designers there, aren't going to know what the fuck to do with a brand new engine. This is another reason why getting designers on loan from another studio, even if in PlayStation, is a weird fucking idea. And it's interesting that the majority of the studio didn't realize they were working on a live service game, but I mean, I guess the majority of the studio are like artists, animators, programmers, guys that like are just, you know, they come in and their workload is, I gotta do a 3D model of this temple. You know, I'm working on this temple for the next 3 months. I guess you wouldn't necessarily have to tell your art department that this temple is going to be used in a live service game, but it's very strange that they didn't inform the entire team of only 50 to 70 people exactly what they were doing, like what the project was. Like, the communication between Bluepoint's leadership and the rank and file is horrendous, and I can't believe, again, on a studio that small, that there was such little communication between the staff and the leadership there. Very soon after Sony Santa Monica folks arrived, Bluepoint staff learned that the game they were having to make was a live service game, and they needed to work with what they had. Internal issues began to arise, and the ones on board with live service were the head at Sony Santa Monica, Sony, and Bluepoint. So just all, like, the suits involved, like the executive leadership at Sony Santa Monica, the executive leadership at Sony, and the executive leadership of Bluepoint. What I imagine was, yeah, Sony at the time wanted more live service stuff. I think the management of Bluepoint had just lofty ambitions for what they wanted the studio to become within PlayStation, and I think they thought that the quickest way to get there was just going to be playing ball with whatever they knew the Sony leadership wanted, which at the time was more God of War and more live service. And then Sony Santa Monica was probably under pressure from Jim Ryan to do something multiplayer, and they're like, well, the best way around this is just to get Bluepoint to do it. It's like, well, there's got to be a God of War multiplayer or something. It's like, hey, let's just push for that to be the Bluepoint game and not our game, so we don't have to fucking worry about it. That's probably what happened. And the Bluepoint was just kind of like caught in the crossfire there. It was unclear whether Bluepoint leadership believed in the project or just doing their best to salvage morale. About 75% of staff employees, according to sources, were against this move and pushed back against making live service. After the deadlines were not hit, internal strife from employees, the project was canceled by Sony earlier 2025, which, sounds like an absolute no-brainer. Apparently, what this game was going to be, and I think this was in the Bloomberg reporting from Jason Schreier. Apparently, the concept for this was going to be Atreus falls into Hades. I don't know why he didn't fall into Helheim, but he fell into the Greek underworld Hades, and his personality got broke into different pieces, and those different pieces of his personality would form the characters that you would choose from in this multiplayer roguelike Souls-like. So it was essentially going to be kind of like a Night Rain. And I mean, this is obviously before Night Rains come out. So like, apparently a lot of people are having the concept for Night Rain around the same time, because there's been a bunch of games that have kind of just done the Night Rain model since. But yeah, so essentially this is going to be like a God of War Night Rain. How different it was going to be from Night Rain, I'm not sure, because again, this is before Night Rain was even announced or anything, or was an idea. And different classes were just going to be different pieces of Atreus' personality. I don't know. It doesn't sound like the worst thing ever, but it sounds just like insanely uninteresting and unimportant, and it just kind of felt like it would have been like, all right, but why? Like, even if it's good, it's just like, yeah, but why? Like, this feels forced. It wouldn't feel like a natural progression or a natural move for a God of War multiplayer thing. It would just feel super forced, I think. So in 2025, Bluepoint begins pitching projects to Sony. Now, you only wasted like 3 years, which is a lot of time to waste, but after Demon's Souls, they start working on Ragnarok and stuff, and now that this is over, it's like, okay, here's a chance to like course correct here. This is where I think Sony really dropped the ball, because up here, you can kind of blame this on like Bluepoint's leadership, I think maybe more than Sony, but down here is where I think Sony like really mismanaged the studio, because they pitched a bunch of remakes after this. So they pitched a Jak and Daxter remake, a Resistance remake, a Shadow of the Colossus remaster, bringing the game to PS5, updating the graphics, and adding 4 to 6 new bosses, with several pulled from the original PS2 content. A Bloodborne remake was again pitched, and a small portion of the team worked on it for 2 to 3 months, but Sony pulled the plug. It was never officially greenlit, but they were deep in negotiations, and Bluepoint thought they would make it. 2 new IPs, and they also worked on some small pitches under CP13 folder, and the codename Black Fang CP14 was pitched. Now, before we get into codename Black Fang, I want to talk about these remaster pitches. So, the Bloodborne one, that was axed by From Software, so there's nothing you can do about that. I kind of understand not wanting to move forward on the Shadow of the Colossus remaster. If it didn't make its production budget back on the PS4, it's probably not magically going to have like a bunch more interest now. Sony's already kind of getting flack for what people are considering unnecessary remasters of PS4 games, and adding 4 to 6 new bosses, I can see that just being super controversial, because Shadow of the Colossus is kind of like Demon's Souls in the fact that like it's kind of seen in the video game community as like a holy grail, perfect piece of art that you shouldn't touch. And as much as I'd be fine with them trying to their hand at some new bosses, I just don't see that going over well. Like, I don't think you're going to get new people in, and I don't think you're going to make the existing fan base happy, so I just don't see it going over very well. So I see like nixing the Shadow of the Colossus remaster as well. These two right here make no sense to turn down. You just had a super successful platformer with Astrobot. People are hot on PlayStation platformers right now. People also really like the Jak and Daxter games, and Naughty Dog is reaffirmed time and time again that they want to move on. They're done with it. And the Jak and Daxter games, despite what a lot of people's nostalgia says, haven't aged great. Like, the controls are a little stiff. Jak and Daxter 2 has got like a ton of issues with its mission design and everything like that. I think they fixed a lot of that stuff in 3, but like there's a lot of potential for Jak and Daxter remake. I think there'd be a lot of interest in it from both old fans and new fans, maybe their first platformer was Astrobot, and if you can put something like this out in between now and the next Astrobot, they'd probably jump all over that. They're like, oh my god, another colorful platformer while I wait for the next Astrobot game. A Jak and Daxter remake would have banged. Even if it was just the first game, I think you'd do the whole trilogy, but even if it was just the first game is short. You could do that quickly. You could, it's a lot less expensive because anything that's like a kind of more stylized, cartoony art style is going to be, it's going to be quicker to manufacture those assets. And if you just remake the first Jak and Daxter, you can have that done in like 2 years, and you can have that put up for like $30 on the PlayStation Store. You know what I mean? That would be a remaster they could do quickly. They might be able to get done in a year. Like a Jak and Daxter remake would have made so much sense. And the other one that makes a lot of sense is a Resistance remake. Now, I think this should have been what they did back in 2022 after they finished God of War Ragnarok. Like the end of 2022 to 2020 to the end of 2024, this 2-year span right here, this should just never happen. It should have all been this from the beginning, but since it wasn't, these are still viable options. But the reason the Resistance remake makes so much sense is because that's your live service right there. Like, that makes the most sense. Like, a God of War multiplayer game doesn't make any sense. Resistance it makes sense. It's a first-person shooter that had multiplayer. Like you don't have to change anything. It's true to the original. Like, if you remake the Resistance trilogy, or even just remake one of them, all 3 games had multiplayer in them. People are going to expect you to bring the multiplayer back. If you want more live service stuff, why are you not going to this well of multiplayer games you've made in the past that people like? And it works for everybody, because the people who just like the Resistance for the story get that story again, remade in modern visuals. And if Bluepoint wants to do original design work, again, the first Resistance game is a little rough. It could use some redesigning, like change up some levels, redesign some areas. You know, there's room in there for original design work. And then even on the multiplayer front, you can completely reimagine Resistance multiplayer. Like, have the traditional deathmatch, team deathmatch, capture the flag, but fucking make a battle royale mode. Make a roguelike multiplayer PvE mode that you can play with your friends. You know, go crazy if the Resistance multiplayer. Do whatever the fuck you want with it. You know, like, that could be your live service right there. Like, you do the remake of the campaign for the fans, and then you do the multiplayer to satisfy the executives. It's a win-win. Why didn't you go with that? And obviously, Insomniac's not going to touch Resistance, and I think Resistance is one of those things that, like, on the PlayStation 3, it never sold that well. So if you're just looking at raw numbers, maybe it doesn't make the most sense to bring back, because it's like, yeah, a lot of people say they liked it, but it didn't actually sell that well. But again, it's suffering from the PS3 effect, where this was the moment in time where PlayStation was at its least popular, and people just weren't checking on PlayStation games like they are now. Like, if you reintroduce any franchise from the PlayStation 3 era now, it immediately has way more interest, immediately has way more eyes on it. Like, if you reintroduce Resistance right now, it becomes way more popular than it ever was on the PlayStation 3. Like, by a long shot, like, I promise. You know, and people are tired of the multiplayer stuff that we're getting now. They're tired of the hero shooters. They're tired of, like, everything being a battle royale. They're tired of like this the formula that we have, looter shooters. Like, they're tired of these formulas that we've boxed multiplayer into now. If you bring back something from the past that's just like, this is multiplayer the way you remember it on 7th gen, that's going to make so many people just excited. You can also slip in the modern stuff too. It's like I said, you could design a battle royale mode for Resistance multiplayer if you want to, as long as you still have a deathmatch and a team deathmatch in there to make the old school fans happy. And have, like, some alternative. Go crazy. Like, no one's going to be upset at more modes. The problem with all of this is, like, you need more designers, and you need more than just 2 designers. You need a game director. Like, you need, like, an established actual game director that is working at the studio, not on borrow from another studio. But the thing that Sony actually greenlit was Black Fang. And to me, this is their worst idea. But codename Black Fang was a Ghost of Tsushima spin-off that Sony liked. Sony gave Bluepoint 5 to 6 months to prototype it until the end of March 2026 to prove they could make it. Employees felt that it was going okay, even though it was never officially greenlit, and they were on track to hit the deadlines. Employees found out on February 19th that they were being shut down, and the Project Black Fang is canceled. Studio's last day is March 2nd, 2026. So, before we get into this last part right here, there's some more detail that comes from Jason Schreier reporting on Bloomberg, and I can't pull up right now because I don't have a subscription to Bloomberg. I'm not going to get one. But I know from watching some other videos of people who have read it a little bit more of inside baseball what's going on here. So apparently what cooked this is not the fact that the game wasn't turning out well, was that, again, they don't have a game director and they have a very small design team. So in order to get this to work, like Sucker Punch would have had to given them a game director, just like with the Sony Santa Monica thing. Sucker Punch would have had to give them a game director, and they would have had to give them designers, and they would have had to work with them, and they would have to work alongside Bluepoint in getting this done. This wasn't just Sucker Punch in Santa Monica. Apparently, like, pretty much all the PlayStation first-party studios were like, we don't want to do that. Like, and I don't blame them. It's like, yeah, no, we don't want to lend out our talent. Like, we're working on our own stuff here. Like, if you're working at Sucker Punch, you don't want to, like, be on lend to another studio that's not Sucker Punch and work on something that's not a Sucker Punch game, you know? It's like, especially Sucker Punch is a small studio as it is. Like, they're not this 200-300 people large studio working on like multiple projects at once. Like Sucker Punch is a one game at a time studio, a relatively small team in terms of like a AAA team, and yeah, they don't want to be working remotely with this other studio that's not them on a project that's not theirs, and like be on lend to this other studio. Like it just doesn't make sense. So like Bluepoint kept hitting this friction where, like, in order to operate, in order to function, they had to be attached to another studio. Another studio wanted to be the one that was attached to them. Not because they didn't like Bluepoint or didn't like the guys there, but it's just like that. Don't take my guys. like if I was running the studio, I'd be like, fuck no, you're not taking my guys. Like, they're my guys. Like they're working on our shit. Like we're a family here. They're not gonna spend all day on FaceTime with a studio working in a different part of the country on a project that's not what the rest of the team is working on. I just don't understand why PlayStation didn't just give them a little bit extra budget to hire on like a full-time director and expand their design department a little bit. And if they didn't want to do that, then why didn't they just greenlight one of these remakes and be like, okay, just do a 1-to-1 remake of Jak and Daxter, do a 1-to-1 remake of Resistance. You know what I mean? Like I think these types of remakes are the perfect opportunity for them to expand, practice their original design work a little bit. But if you absolutely cannot hire on a director, you absolutely cannot expand the design department, just do a fucking straight up 1-to-1 remake, or just be like, hey, we're just gonna put you guys back on asset control for a while. Like the Sony Santa Monica guys are working on the God of War 1 remakes, and you're gonna do asset work for them until we have the budget to hire you guys a director and expand your design team. You guys are just strictly on asset duty, which I know is not the most exciting thing in the world, but it's better than being shut down. Going back to Code Black Fang, I know PlayStation liked it, and apparently the team thought it was going well, but I think that this would not have gone over well. To me, Ghost of Tsushima, Ghost of Yotei is one of those things where it's like, it's good in moderation. If you start flooding the market with this franchise, it's going to dilute it a lot. Because Ghost of Tsushima and Yotei are very close in, like, overall design structure to something like Assassin's Creed. But the difference is, like, restraint, right? Assassin's Creed is just, there's too much of it. The games are too big, there's too many of them. It's diluted itself way too much. Whereas what's keeping Yotei and Tsushima, like, a step above is, like, they're not, there's only two of them. They came out a long time apart from each other. They're designed super well to, like, not just be checkpoints, like, checklists, open world games. There's a lot of, like, really great design philosophy that goes into them that, because Sucker Punch has, like, 20 years of design, like, they're a very experienced studio. I don't know that a spin-off is going to work out that well from an, like, it's... Like, what makes Ghost of Yotei and Ghost of Tsushima work isn't the fact that it's a super original idea or that the concept is just a banger. What makes it work is because of how well those games are designed. And I think if you put that same game in the hands of a less experienced studio, it doesn't work anymore. Like, some games are just like, yeah, maybe there's some design flaws, but it's such an original concept that it doesn't matter. Ghost of Tsushima and Yotei are not, like, original concepts, you know what I mean? Like, they're Assassin's Creed, but done by a much more talented studio. You know what I mean? And so, like, I just don't know. Also, like, what would a spin-off of Ghost of Tsushima be? Like, Ghost of Yotei is as much of a spin-off of Tsushima as it is a sequel, you know what I mean? Because they don't have anything to do with each other, really. They're just, like, they just occupy the same name because they are spiritually and conceptually like sequels to each other, right? What would a spin-off to Ghost of Tsushima be? Like what would that to me, like, this is just not an exciting project, like not an exciting prospect to begin with. And it's weird that like that's the one they greenlit. Like that's such a strange project to greenlight. Also, what were the two original IPs they were working on? Because there is no detailing on that, but apparently in addition to the remakes, in addition to Black Fang, there was also two original IPs, and I wonder what those were. But yeah, it's, to me, anything would have been better than what they decided to go with. And then apparently what they decided to go with was also not a great choice because it got canceled. It's worth noting that Bluepoint did use contractors. However, the majority of the people stayed at the studio from Shadow until Shuttering. About 40 employees had been there the entire time, with the rest of them being contractors. This obviously has fluctuated with retirements, deaths, and turnover. According to all sources, people stayed at Bluepoint and wanted to continue to stay there. A sad story in such a wonderful group of talented artists. I am grateful that we understand more about what happened here. The closure makes a lot more sense now. The studio was a mess for a long time, and I can understand that from a corporate perspective, it looked like there was no salvaging Bluepoint. I still think that the death of the studio was just criminal mismanagement from PlayStation and very irresponsible management from Bluepoint's leadership. The leadership of Bluepoint had no idea what the studio was capable of in its current form, and I think was kind of Icarus themselves. They flew too close to the sun, and they realized that they didn't have enough of designers to not have the wings melt off. And then PlayStation was not hands-on enough at the beginning in terms of guiding them in a place where they could succeed. And then at the end, they just lost sight of like what their strengths were entirely. Because PlayStation, it does not normally deny pitches, right? Like PlayStation's pretty notorious for letting the studio just kind of do what they want to do. And I think that's what they were doing at first. And then when they went into panic mode, they're like, okay, we really got to salvage the studio. They start saying no to stuff that they should not have said no to. Like these, they shouldn't even have to pitch these. This should have been like you pull up to the office with a folder of games that they can remake, and these are in the folder, and they pick which one of these like three to do. You know what I mean? It is just terrible mismanagement from PlayStation's end, and terrible mismanagement from Bluepoint's leadership. And I'm so confused. Because it seemed like there was no real plan when they got acquired. It seemed like Bluepoint didn't have a great plan of what to do after they were acquired. And PlayStation acquired them because without having a plan of what to do with them after they got them, which is just like a strange way to do business. So there's obviously still questions that we'll never 100% get the answers to. But at least we have a better understanding of like where things went wrong. So Bluepoint just wants to take Sony's games and make their own spin-offs. I'm sorry, but that makes no sense to me. Don't mess with something that's working. Exactly, yeah. Like it like pitching these spin-offs of existing titles seems like the worst possible option. It's like either do a remake and add stuff to the remake or do an original IP, but don't like true a spin-off of like someone else's project. You know what I mean? Like it's especially when you don't have a strong track record of any original work to go off of. You know, like if I was Sony Santa Monica or Sucker Punch, I would be nervous to like hand over my franchise to these guys who haven't really proven themselves yet. Tsushima Yote worked because the studio was experienced. They stayed true to the games. They kept up with the amazing story, mixed with amazing gameplay. It made us feel like we were watching an interactive movie, so to speak. Exactly, yeah. Like the Ghost games work because of the studio that made them. I don't know, man. The whole thing is super frustrating and confusing, but at least we understand now. You know, it's not too late. Retract the closure and put the studio to work on that Jak and Daxter remake. I mean, that's not going to happen, but one can dream.